attacks the doctors, accusing them of playing politics as they announce more strike dates. Will the public stay with the medics or move to May? Good evening. NHS patients face more delays and cancellations, with 3 new sets of junior doctor strikes just announced on top of the 5-day walkout this month. The medics are still furious, claiming the Health Secretary is trying to force a 7-day operation on 5-day money based on dodgy evidence. It puts patients at risk, they say, and undervalues doctors. But Theresa May today backed her Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt. The public have generally sided with doctors over politicians. So is Mrs May the woman to buck the trend?
Also on tonight's programme, after the Brexit doom and gloom, might we see a boom? British manufacturing activity reports its biggest month-on-month increase in a quarter of a century, sending the pound soaring. Whatever happened to the taming of Trump? He's back from Mexico, redoubling his pledge to build a wall to keep the neighbours out.
On day one, we will begin working on an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall.
And violent protests in Gabon after claims the president rigged his return to power. The opposition leader tells us he might get killed tonight as he appeals for international help.
And days before Brazil puts on a glorious display of Paralympic talent from around the world, we reveal the shame in its own backyard. How some rainforest tribes are still killing babies born with disabilities.
Algum tipo de deficiência é uma maldição para a aldeia e que não podem ficar porque vai trazer coisas ruins, né?
Put patients first and stop playing politics. No sign of compromise today from Theresa May as the British Medical Association announced 3 more extended strikes on top of the 5-day walkout later this month. Hospitals across England are quickly drawing up contingency plans, warning the impact could be severe. But doctors said they'd been left with no alternative but to take action. So will the public remain behind them? Here's our health and social care correspondent, Victoria MacDonald.
In 11 days' time, Dr. Ben White will once again find himself on a picket line, a junior doctor protesting against the government-imposed contract. Today we took Dr. White to the outside of the hospital where he trained in London so he could gauge public reaction.
What do we think of junior doctor strikes, honestly? Yes. Well, you have the right, obviously, to strike.
What's your feeling?
Well, what are my emotions on the subject? Well, my wife here is about to be admitted for a month or so. So you can imagine that my feelings are not those of straightforward socialist solidarity with you. It remains to be seen what the impact is going to be on her.
Fully in support of the strike. I'm fully in support. I am a public servant as well, so I feel I've been treated quite badly under this government.
And what's your main concern?
My main concern is that if something happens to someone in my family, we won't be able to get to the hospital and get treatment. We'll just be turned back.
The first strike, in England only, will be from September the 12th for 5 days, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And tonight it was announced there will be 3 more sets of strikes from October to December. A whole new level of industrial action never seen before.
There is almost a feeling here at the British Medical Association of the morning after the night before. A night in which BMA Council made an unprecedented and historic decision to go ahead with 5 days of strikes by junior doctors. But it was not a decision, from what I understand, that was reached lightly. In fact, one insider has told me that the discussion there last night was robust. Another described it as passionate, while another said it was heated.
And the Junior Doctors Committee is well aware of the criticisms they face over this action.
On the days of the industrial action, our very, very well qualified consultants, specialists, general practitioners, our nurses, physiotherapists, pharmacists, the hospital will be full of very well qualified, very experienced people to deliver emergency care. If you're sick on those days...
It's not the same though, is it? Because you're cancelling those operations. There'll be patients who've had more than one operation now cancelled that might have a hip replacement required. It's not life-threatening, but it's really debilitating.
No, and we here absolutely understand that this is disruptive for patients. but not having a workforce will disrupt the entire NHS moving forwards. And to get this industrial action to stop, for it to not even have to happen, just takes stopping imposing a contract.
And the BMA points to the risk register leaked to Channel 4 News last week, which shows deep concern from within the Department of Health itself about the government's 7-day NHS policy in England, including lack of staff and money. But today the Prime Minister came out in support of the Health Secretary and accused the BMA of playing politics.
This is a deal that is safe for patients. The government is putting patients first. The BMA should be putting patients first, not playing politics.
Jeremy Hunt himself was not available to talk to Channel 4 News, but he said earlier in the day that the government had made a number of concessions over the contract. Yet there are still fundamental sticking points: patient safety, recruitment, the impact on part-time workers and weekend working.
Well, needless to say, we did ask to speak to the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, but we're told he was again unavailable. Joining me from Ilkeston in Derbyshire is the Conservative MP Maggie Throop, who's on the Commons Health Select Committee. And with me in the studio, Liz McAnulty, trustee for the Patients Association, and Ben White, the doctor we just saw in Victoria's report. He's on the committee that recommended strike action to the BMA. Maggie Throop, doctors are amongst the most trusted and liked people in Britain. Politicians are amongst the least trusted and most disliked people in Britain. What can you say to our viewers tonight to persuade them they've got it all wrong?
Well, let's put that aside. I think the important thing is that patients must come first. The agreement was made last May, and those negotiations were led by the well-respected Sir David Dalton, and the Royal Colleges recommended the agreement, and the BMA agreed as well at that time. So, what's changed? Why do the junior doctors now think that, in effect, they know better than the people that negotiated for them on their behalf who agreed to the contract?
Ben White, can you explain that?
I should just say I only just became a member of BMA Council last night, but the deal I think was offered at a referendum to junior doctors, and then 58% of junior doctors said that it wasn't acceptable. Some of the main concerns relating to discrimination, equality, the value of weekends, family time, and many other issues which were unresolved.
So your leaders got it wrong when they put the deal to you? That's what you're saying?
I suppose on a personal level, our leader, Johan, at the time, felt that was the best possible contract he could recommend, and he recommended it. And obviously, most of us read the contract ourselves and felt this is not going to be safe. We're not happy with it.
Liz McAnulty, where do you stand on this? Whose side are you on?
Well, we are very definitely on only one side, and that is the side of the patients. And a lot of lip service is talked about who's on the side of the patients.
So that means you're anti-strike?
Well, the difficulty with that is we are going to be seeing patients being really seriously inconvenienced and left in a lot of pain in many cases as a result of the strike. However, at the Patients Association, we are seeing that, but in a less concentrated form throughout the year. And our concern about this is that although the contract is causing the problem, the reason why the Secretary of State introduced the contract was to enable provision of a 7 days a week service. At the Patients Association, we fully support a 7 day a week service. Why should patients get a worse service one day of the week than on another? So we fully support it, but the problem is there is growing evidence that the service is creaking at the seams. On a 5 day a week service, there is no extra money being provided for this. So our concern is, how can we have a fully functioning, effective National Health Service 7 days a week when we haven't got it 5 days a week? And it's not just about doctors.
OK, well, we'll come back to that.
Thank you.
Maggie Throop, this is the point. The doctors have been warning you that you can't have a 7 day service on 5 day money. Your own civil servants, this programme revealed just a few days ago, have been warning the Health Secretary exactly the same thing. Why are you ploughing on with this despite all the warnings?
Well, let's remember that this government have actually promised and committed an extra £10 billion into the NHS.
Yeah.
This isn't a department that's ring-fenced at all. And that is the first time that so much money has been promised so far forward into the future.
But your own
We've got the
experts in your
5-year
own
forward
department
view.
have said, stop going on about £10 billion. It doesn't mean very much. The point is, you are unable to deliver your promises as things stand.
I think we've got to remember that the NHS does work 7 days a week. What we want to make sure is that every patient can get full diagnostic services and the full backup that they need when they are admitted over the weekend. And we are putting more money into the NHS. We are employing more people and training more doctors, more nurses, more physios.
Yeah, why are you ignoring the
across
experts,
the
is my
range.
question.
I think if you read the report from the civil servants, it was actually saying that there are different scenarios, and I think so the worst case scenario could be that, but there are other scenarios as well. I think there's more to it than just those headlines that you've said.
Ben White, I mean, you are also part of this group of doctors who are taking the Health Secretary to court, challenging his right to impose the contract. The point is, he is an elected leader. He's got a mandate. Yeah. He's got the right to impose a contract if he wants, hasn't he?
Well, I suppose we'll find out in court, but the key point to the case really is that actually the evidence relating to a weekend effect is massively disputed, and in fact there's about 10 good studies in the last 10 years that will tell you there is not a weekend effect, quite separate to what the Secretary of State says. There's a 7-day services promise which has been made, and actually, as you say, the Department of Health thinks that's risky to try and deliver on our current levels of staff. And also, the point is, we shouldn't be imposing this contract at a time when the frontline medics are telling you we have concerns about patient safety. We need to fix what we've got now before we go ahead imposing anything.
Now, I know you don't want to pick a side, but from what you've just heard, do you agree with Ben or do you agree with Maggie?
Well, this is the problem. Both sides have their argument to make. What they're not really...
I know they've got an argument to make, but which side's right?
Well, both and neither, but what they really need to do, and the Patients Association would call upon them both, to meet the Secretary of State, the BMA and patients groups to meet tomorrow to stop this strike happening next week. It really does mean, instead of blaming each side, sit down. There is a solution to this, but it will only be brought about through talking. We're thinking of all of the patients who are very distressed as we speak about cancellations, just all sorts of problems. But we are also thinking in the longer term of the bigger problems affecting the NHS. And this is, frankly, getting in the way of discussing the wider problems throughout the year and getting worse that are affecting
Maggie
patients.
Throop, why will the Secretary of State not take away this threat and not sit down properly with the doctors? He's made no progress in months.
Well, I think that's not right. I mean, the progress was made back in May, and then obviously the agreement was made, and the BMA
How many months ago was May?
But I think the Secretary, there's quite a few months now. But obviously,
so what's happened between then
the
and now?
BMA. Well, I don't think the BMA have actually wanted to negotiate, and the Secretary of State today has said, and the Prime Minister Theresa May has said, get round and talk. That's so important. But we need to know what the talks are about. The BMA, the trade union, seem to keep moving the goalposts, and that's completely wrong. And that's what patients don't like. They don't like agreements being made and then the goalposts have been moved again.
OK, Ben White, briefly, can you respond to this? I mean, is it true that you haven't really been interested in talking?
I don't believe so. No, I think what we really need to do at the moment is you've got 50,000 patient safety experts working in the NHS. That's the junior doctors. We know what's going to be unsafe. What we need is to be listened to before this thing is imposed and pushed through, and have our concerns taken seriously.
We must leave it there. Ben White, Liz McAnulty and Maggie Throop, thank you all very much indeed. Still to come tonight, Theresa May puts housing at the top of her social reform agenda, but prices are rising and councils aren't building. Given the scale of the crisis, what can the government do?
Now, it's a key indicator of the strength of manufacturing and confidence in the British economy. The PMI index for August, revealed today, shows that future orders haven't just rebounded from the huge slide which followed the Brexit vote. In fact, they've positively boomed. The figures sent the pound soaring too on the foreign exchanges. So does this all put paid to talk of a looming recession? Our business correspondent Helia Ebrahimi is here to explain more. Helia, tell us.
Well, look, I think you'd be a fool to think we were quite out of the woods yet. But it's hard to ignore this manufacturing data. Remember, this is 10% of our economy. And if you look at today's figures, you can see that this is the best reading we've had since October last year. Just last month, you had that real retraction into negative territory after the Brexit vote that the Bank of England used as evidence for why they needed to step in and introduce that massive stimulus package. But today, sentiment has rebounded. In fact, it's the best reading month on month since the survey began. The problem is, this won't ultimately tell you whether we're going to go into recession. It won't even tell you if Project Fear was overdone, because the Bank of England could argue, well, look, if we hadn't stepped in with some stimulus, then business sentiment wouldn't be where it is today. And I think going forward, the question is going to be, if the data remains positive, will this mean the Chancellor will now not go forward with fiscal stimulus?
Helia, thank you very much. Well, one of the ministers charged with forging our new post-Brexit relationship with Europe was in Northern Ireland today to emphasise that. Even though the government remained determined to control the number of people coming into the UK, no hard border with Ireland was being planned, he said. And David Davis, the Minister for Exiting the EU, added that when it came to new trade agreements, he'd be aiming for as few barriers as possible for UK businesses too.
With respect to access to the single market, what we will seek to do is have, ideally, a tariff-free access, but it's, this is a matter of negotiation. And we will be negotiating over an issue which I suspect we'll find is in the interests of the other members of the European Union, as well as us, to get a good trading relationship in the long run.
Well, joining us now from North Leicestershire is the Conservative MP, Remain supporter and former Business Minister Anna Soubry, who served 4 years in David Cameron's government from 2012 to earlier this year. Anna Soubry, before the referendum, you warned that Brexit would have, and I quote, a serious impact on our economy. After the referendum, immediately after, you said it was a dreadful day for our economy. Today, we have the biggest month-on-month increase in manufacturing activity in a quarter of a century. So did you get it wrong?
No, I think, look, first of all, it would be a very peculiar politician that didn't welcome this good news and welcome good economic figures. But I don't think we should be under any illusions. As your correspondent editor quite rightly pointed out, a lot of this is because of the very good, swift action that the Bank of England took, putting in liquidity and stabilising the markets. And we'll all remember that terrible shock after the country voted to leave. And of course, I think the other reason why we are seeing this return of some confidence is because, I have to say this, unlike the Labour Party, we did not mess about when our leader resigned, David Cameron stepped down. We got on, and not only did we choose a good new leader, we actually put in place somebody with a very good pair of hands who has been exactly what we needed.
Okay,
that
so now,
stability and stabilising things. So there's that.
Okay,
but
so
there are other figures
let me
that
just
will
pick
come
you up
out
on
and
that.
other figures that we need to look at.
OK, let me just pick you up on that, though. Before the referendum, again, you said the economy will undoubtedly go into decline. Do you still think recession is pretty inevitable, or do you want to admit that you over-egged it beforehand?
Hang on, I said our economy will suffer, and it will suffer.
You said
when
the
we leave the
economy will
European Union. We
undoubtedly
haven't
go
done that
into
yet.
decline. That's an exact
yes,
quote.
I didn't say the word recession.
Well,
So let's not
going into
let's use the
decline.
right words, because yes, and it will go into decline. And in fact, there's good evidence already, unfortunately, that there has been decline. So if you look at the GDP figures for the last quarter, you'll see in April it was 2.3%, which was extremely good. That helped us to weather the storm after we voted to leave the European Union. Because if you then look at the figures for May and notably in June, there was a steep decline. So I'm pleased by today's figures. But we're not even in the woods, never mind out of the woods.
Okay,
and
so no
I've
recession,
always
though.
said,
You'll put
this
it on
isn't about
record
my
now.
generation, it's about our children and grandchildren. It's about their future, and it's about the fact that when we do leave the European Union, we will undoubtedly, in my view, be worse off than if we stayed within the European Union. But we are where we are. What we now need to do is work out what Brexit means, and what we also need to do is secure the very best deal that we possibly can for our country.
So on that, is it possible to limit immigration, as Theresa May wants to, she says it's a red line, without damaging the economy, in your view?
Well, you know my views on immigration. I believe that we must continue to make the positive case for immigration. It has benefited our country in many ways for centuries, actually. And I want to see and make sure that British business... Well, I was answering your question. I believe it is absolutely imperative that British business has access to the free movement of labour. It's not perfect. There are more things that can be done. But of course we need that. Otherwise our economy will suffer.
And you can't limit immigration, as Theresa May wants to, and get unfettered access to the single market, can you?
Well, we don't know that.
Well,
and
no
this
other
is what
EU
we now need to
country has.
discover. Well, we want our own deal, and I certainly want us to be part of that single market, to have that access, as David Davis was explaining. We need to be tariff-free, custom-free, and I also want us to be in a position whereby we can have people coming into our country when we need these people to come in and work in our factories and in our businesses and contribute as they do. Overwhelmingly, we know from the last HMRC figures that immigration contributes £2.4 billion to our economy. So immigration and the work of migrant labourers is to the benefit of our country. That is what I very firmly believe in.
We don't know what any of these deals are going to look like, but what we do know as of this week is that Brexit, full Brexit, is definitely happening, according to Theresa May. Do you accept now that there's no possibility of compromise, any kind of broader staying in the EU, the public changing their mind at some point down the road and staying in a reformed EU?
Look, we've got to accept the vote. I mean, for goodness sakes, the last thing the British people want is another referendum. We've got to accept the vote. We said to people, if you vote out, it means out, and we've got to be true to that. The real question, forgive me if I may say, is that the people who supported Brexit and led it, and there are three of them, three of the biggest players in our cabinet, these are the people who now need to deliver and explain to the British people what exactly Brexit is. They are the ones who need to tell us what our future looks like. And of course, that's what British business wants. It wants certainty. It wants to know about the future. And at the moment, it's not getting that. So one set of good figures I absolutely welcome, but be under no illusions at all. Leaving the European Union is not in the long-term interests of our people and our economy.
Anna Soubry, thank you very much for joining us. Krish. Well, one country that is looking to capitalise out of Brexit is Poland. The Deputy Prime Minister of Poland is in the UK, hoping to woo Britain's biggest banks and encourage them to move business from London to Warsaw. Well, earlier I spoke to Mateusz Morawiecki, Poland's Deputy Prime Minister, and asked him why he was confident that businesses would want to make the move.
Warsaw can offer very good conditions for businesses from all around the world, and this is not only post-Brexit referendum, this was also pre-Brexit referendum, so more and more companies think about expanding their middle office functions in Poland, and some very big names, so many of them present already in Poland, they were telling us quite openly that they were happy with how their operations in Poland work, and they are going to expand them, and what we can do for them to enable this process.
There's a bit of a contrast, isn't there? Because here we've had the tragic death in Harlow of Arek Jovic, the Polish factory worker, a suspected hate crime. We've had a surge in reported racist crimes. Do you feel that Poles are welcome in the UK or not?
I heard that there is this line of investigation by the police that this might have been a hate crime. Of course, condolences for the family and a very sad moment. I believe that the British society and the British nation is very positive about the Poles coming to the Great Britain. So I just hope that this won't happen again, because we would like to be sure that the Polish population in the UK is safe.
When you look at the numbers, 850,000 Poles currently living in the UK, a huge figure. Do you understand the frustrations of Britons who say that that's a big burden on public services and that their jobs, Britain's jobs, are under threat?
Well, no, I would not agree with such a position. I think that Poland lost 1 million population, entrepreneurial young people who are working, paying taxes, who are contributing to the wealth of the British nation here and contributing to the wealth of the UK. So they are usually not living on the social benefits.
Forgive me for interrupting, but they are using public services, schools,
no
hospitals. You can understand the frustration of Britons.
But by and large, the majority of the population is working and is paying taxes here. And if they use the public services like the schools and everything else, they are well paying for the usage of those public services. So in general, this line of argumentation is not right. I think that the Polish population here was extremely positive for the economic development of the United Kingdom, and it was weakening of the growth potential for Polish economy. So whoever would like to come back to Poland, I would be very happy with this, but I understand it's an individual decision of every family, every person.
Mateusz Morawiecki, thank you very much for joining us.
Now, he still wants to deport 11 million people. He still wants a wall along the Mexican border. And he still wants the Mexicans to pay. A fiery speech from Donald Trump on immigration hours after his hastily arranged trip to Mexico for talks with the president. Our correspondent Kylie Morris is in Washington. Kylie.
Yes, Krish, it has been quite the 24 hours in Trumpian politics. First, we had this lightning quick visit to meet the Mexican president, having roundly criticized Mexico, Mexicans and the Mexican government throughout his campaign. That meeting began well, ended badly. Then Mr. Trump went back to Phoenix for a speech on immigration, which many people thought might see a softening in his policy based on indications from Mr. Trump himself. But certainly that did not happen. Scrub that. There was no softening. Quite the opposite.
De los Estados Unidos de América, señor Donald Trump.
Thank you.
Early afternoon, and Senor Donald Trump, friend to the Mexican people, was role-playing president.
We all share a common interest in keeping our hemisphere safe, prosperous, and free.
President Peña Nieto, a man whose country doubts him almost as much as it loathes Trump, tried to strike a tough but fair tone. Yes, he says, Trump has said hurtful things about Mexicans in the past, but now has a genuine interest in building a relationship that benefits both nations. As for the border wall and who pays for it...
We did discuss the wall. We didn't discuss payment of the wall. That'll be for a later date.
We don't know why the Mexican leader didn't speak up there and then, but before Trump had landed north of the border, the president revealed he told him at the very start Mexico isn't paying for any wall. But Trump was not for turning. In Phoenix, just hours later to deliver his big speech on immigration, his backers wore caps declaring, "Make Mexico great again" also. But even they were out of date as soon as their candidate opened his mouth.
We will build a great wall along the southern border, and Mexico will pay for the wall. They don't know it yet, but they're going to pay for the wall.
No more diplomacy, forget the measured demeanor. This was Trump with red meat for his political base.
We take anybody. Come on in, anybody. Just come on in. Not anymore. 2 million people, criminal aliens. Day one, my first hour in office, those people are gone. And you can call it deported if you want. The press doesn't like that term. You can call it whatever the hell you want. They're gone. Under a Trump administration, it's called America First. Remember that.
Some had expected Trump to adjust, to widen his appeal. But for Hispanic Americans, it was a forceful return to his message of old.
He has been opening doors in the nation for some hate and some racism and bigotry. And we're very worried that even after the elections, we're going to see some of the impact of what he sparked, what he's inciting. That's not the kind of nation that we are.
But what of the broader tastes of the American electorate? Over breakfast in Annapolis, Maryland, there were those who praised his strong stand in Phoenix.
And I think he did a wonderful, wonderful job of explaining just what it is to be an American. And if all the immigrants want to be American, they're more than welcome.
They make up a large part of our workforce, and there's an awful lot of illegal immigrants that are raising families, that are working hard, that should not be deported. He promotes hate, and I don't like that. That's why I said he scares me a little bit.
I like his kind of rough side where he doesn't really hold anything back, because that's the side of him that's really going to get things done. But at the same time, like his more apologetic side, that's going to be what's going to make him the best president.
Thank you. God bless you, everybody.
Donald Trump's big gamble, away and at home, proving he's versatile to some, dangerously unpredictable to others. And just briefly, I should just add that a national poll has just come out giving Trump a lead on Clinton. It's only a 1-point lead, but this is significant. She has led for most of the recent polls. She did very well out of the conventions, but there is every indication now that this race is tightening.
Thanks, Kylie. Catherine.
Thanks, Krish. 3 people have been killed in 2 days of violence in Gabon. The capital of the West African country has witnessed another day of rioting and looting after a close and disputed presidential election result. President Ali Bongo says he was re-elected while his rival Jean Ping has called on him to step down. We'll hear from Mr. Ping in a moment, but first, this report by our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Jonathan Rugman.
It was an oil-rich beacon of relative stability. But on the streets of Gabon's capital, Libreville, that stability has disappeared. Protesters battling riot police after claiming the weekend's election was rigged. Ali the Robber says this graffiti after President Ali Bongo claimed another victory, his father having ruled here before him since the 1960s.
50 years, we're tired, and this is why we're making demands.
Yesterday, protesters attacked Parliament after the election result was announced. Just 6,000 votes between the two candidates. Bongo's rival, Jean Ping, a former diplomat, winning in 6 out of 9 provinces. The violence sparked by a vast turnout reported from the president's home province, which allowed him to give this acceptance speech.
A majority of you voted for me in this election. But all the people voted in peace and transparency, which I congratulate you for.
Mr. Ping says everyone knows he won, while the US and the old colonial power France have called for Gabon to publish each polling station result. Last night, Ping's party headquarters were attacked by the Presidential Guard and the police. The government said it was targeting criminals who had attacked the parliament first. Dozens have been injured, 3 people reported killed, over 1,000 arrested, and no sign of an end to this political crisis.
I have decided that as soon as they remove my bullets, I'll be back out on the streets tomorrow.
The opposition are calling on President Bongo to step down. This country of under 2 million people thrown into chaos by this election result.
Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Jean Ping on the phone from Libreville. I started by asking what the situation was there.
We are under the dictatorship of one man who has been there with the clan, with his family, ruling the country for half a century, and who want to continue for a new half a century. The population has rejected that violently. Can you imagine the president is using a helicopter to shoot his population, and the reaction is unanimously protesting against that.
Are you saying people are being killed?
Yes, of course.
How many?
Well, in my headquarters, 2 people have been killed, and about a little bit less than 20 injured. About 50 people have been killed in the city by his presidential guards. How can you think that this can continue like that? It can't. It's the beginning of the end.
Are you under attack where you are?
Oh, yes, everybody, I don't know if they might kill me tonight or not, it depends on them. I have asked protection from the various embassies.
Who have you asked for protection?
Everybody, the Americans, the French, the European Union.
What do they say?
They say we are transmitting the demand to our authorities. So I am waiting for.
How will this be solved? Should the election be rerun?
No. We are not asking for a rerunning of election because things are clear. We are just asking to be counted in front of the observers.
Because you believe you have won?
I don't believe that I won. I know that I won. Everybody knows that I won.
The president says they are criminals.
Well, you see, this is somebody who is a criminal, calling the peaceful people criminals. It's always like that with that man. Who is criminal? Who has been confiscating the power for 50 years of this country? Is it me or him?
The besieged opposition leader in Gabon, Jean Ping. Kathy.
Thanks, Krish. Now, it's a celebration of sporting talent and triumph over the odds. But days before Rio opens the Paralympic Games, there are far more disturbing attitudes to disability in some of Brazil's communities, and an horrific custom which some rights groups are battling to end. As part of our No Go Brazil series, our Latin America correspondent Guillermo Galdos travelled into the Amazon rainforest to find out more about why some babies born with disabilities are still being killed by their families, and also to meet the mothers desperate to save their children who managed to escape.
Some worlds are rarely seen or heard. Some cultures little understood. And here in the Amazon, one custom many believe unthinkable: the killing of disabled children. Some tribes say it's simply a matter of survival. For the Tatuyo people, monkey is a delicacy. They once hunted them with bows and arrows. Now, a shotgun will do.
Esa carne es sabrosa. Es muy gustosa. Sí.
The Tatuyos have long had outside contact and stopped practicing infanticide on disabled children decades ago. But some isolated Amazon communities still kill babies born with disabilities. It can be superstition or simply the challenge of caring for someone who cannot look after themselves in a punishing environment.
Quando nasceu o filho dele com deficiência, vai matar. No viagem não dá para carregar. Custa muito viver na área isolada, fechado. Tem formigas, tem cabras, tem mosquito, tem tudo. Para viver com essa criança, com esse problema, não adianta. Por isso o pai, junto com a mãe, decidiam e acabavam enterrando nele.
On the outskirts of Brasilia, a refuge houses some people who carry haunting stories. It's called Atini, meaning Voice for Life, a Christian mission for disabled indigenous people and their families who have fled their tribal lands. I went to meet them. Iganani was born with severe cerebral palsy 12 years ago in an isolated village. Her mother, Muwaji, was told she had to kill her daughter, but she couldn't do it. So she fled with her child.
Minha coração? Tá bom.
Essa aqui é a frase dos funcionários da escola.
Só isso.
Muwaji still misses her old life with the Suruwaha tribe, but has never been back. Forced to start again in a strange new world, with a child who needs 24-hour care. Every day she brings Iganani to the local school. She too had to find her place.
Eu acho que se a Iganani tivesse acontecido realmente a questão do infanticídio com ela, ela não estaria aqui com a gente fica imaginando como que seria sem a Iganani aqui nas nossas vidas.
Infanticide has been documented in more than 5 ethnic groups in the Amazon. But many tribes still have no contact with the outside world. No one knows how many children have been killed. Kanyu is 17 and has muscular dystrophy. She loves punk rock and Tarantino films. Her parents knew she would have no life in the jungle, so they brought her here. The 5 families in Atini are from all over Brazil's Amazon. João Sousa is a devout Christian who has run this place for 3 years, mostly with funding from evangelical churches.
De que missionários estavam dentro das aldeias e aí, claro, viram uma necessidade. Famílias, mães que necessitavam sair das suas aldeias com suas filhas e que precisavam de um lugar.
For a decade, Atini has fought to guarantee the rights of all indigenous children. But some anthropologists criticize their motives. They say contact with the outside world has led to many communities disappearing entirely, and that these cultures should be left alone. Você aqui não impõe nenhum tipo de religião?
Pelo contrário, não se trata de você pegar indígenas, trazer para cá para evangelizar os indígenas, colocar sobre a vida deles a religião, né? Não se trata disso. O infanticídio é algo que não é falado. Infelizmente, nós temos o costume de não querer falar sobre aquilo que nos traz dor. Você está entendendo? Então nós preferimos deixar separado, deixa escondido, deixa isso assim. Não, gente, mas é uma realidade.
Sunday afternoon means a day trip for Kanyu and her family. Brazil's capital is a far cry from their former life. Kanyu wants others to have the same opportunities she's had.
Elas acham que crianças como a gente, assim, que tem algum tipo de deficiência, é uma maldição para a aldeia e que não podem ficar porque vai trazer coisas ruins, né? Cara, a gente não é nenhum tipo de maldição, a gente não tem culpa de ter nascido assim, né? Então, com certeza deveria mudar.
Guilherme pequenininho, nasceu, depois a mão dela assim, ó, mal. Depois a perna dela tá assim. Eu falei minha mãe e meu pai. Eu falei, eu vou à cidade, eu vou ao médico, Guilherme vai andar e vou voltar. É isso.
E o que falaram eles?
Meu pai chorou, minha mãe também chorou. Mexer, dar veneno, matar logo a terra, não quero não, eu falei.
Iganani now receives the care she needs.
Agora sabe tudo, mexe de perna, mexe do mão, tá melhorando.
A new bill to guarantee the rights of indigenous children carries Muwagi's name and already has the support of the Brazilian Congress. Muwagi is still too scared to return home.
Eu quero voltar na boca. Conversa meu pai e minha mãe. Saudade pouco, né, meu pai?
She's haunted by the stigma of her disabled child and defiance of the tribe. Haunted too by the painful memory of her husband, who killed himself when their baby was born. The bridge between her worlds is yet to be built.
Guillermo Galdos in the Amazon. Now, in the last few minutes, the civil defence authorities in New Zealand have issued a tsunami warning and ordered the evacuation of some areas along the coast following a powerful offshore earthquake. The 7.1 magnitude quake struck deep beneath the ocean, about 100 miles northeast of Gisborne.
Hundreds of thousands of opposition supporters have filled the streets of the Venezuelan capital, Caracas, demanding an end to socialist rule. Demonstrators flocked to the city from across the country, demanding a recall election against President Nicolas Maduro and blaming his leadership for the deep economic crisis.
Now, relations have come a long way in 4 years. British Airways is resuming direct flights to Tehran tonight. It's already promoting trips to Iran on its website, extolling the lush parks, the perfect climate and the brilliant shopping. It's not so lush for the UK Iranian citizens currently languishing in Tehran's notorious Evin jail. Diana Magnay has been speaking to the relatives and supporters here, fighting for their release.
Happy birthday to you.
A plaintive happy birthday outside the Iranian embassy for a man who'll spend it in a Tehran jail. Anglo-Iranian businessman Kamal Farougi was working in Tehran for a Malaysian oil company when he was arrested in May 2011 and charged with espionage. After 3 years with no contact, his family now get to speak to him once a week.
These calls are very basic. We've been warned from the beginning not to ask details about the conditions or anything like that. He doesn't complain about the conditions. We were warned that if he starts doing that sort of thing, their calls might stop.
Here too is Richard Ratcliffe, whose wife Nazanin was detained in April as she was about to fly home with her baby daughter after visiting her parents. The charges against her aren't clear. Held for the first few weeks in solitary confinement, Richard has only been able to speak to her twice, though her Iranian parents and 2-year-old Gabriella have been allowed in to see her.
When the family go in, they have to put scarves over, sacks over their heads and be taken through to the secret part of the prison. Unfortunately, Gabriella's young enough that she doesn't, understand anything other than a dressing up game. But it's clearly a traumatic experience getting in and out, and well worth it to be able to see her and to be reassured that she's still alive.
Gabriella turned 2 in Iran. Richard's worried what might happen if he goes to pick her up.
Free Grandpa!
Free Grandpa!
Grandpa turns 77 on Saturday, but this was brought forward to mark the resumption of British Airways flights to Tehran, long a barometer of Anglo-Iranian relations. Last year, the then Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond brought a trade delegation to Iran, sending the clear message after the signing of the nuclear deal that business was back on.
But the arrests of British nationals is testament to the hostility and mistrust still felt by some Iranians and certainly within some conservative factions in the government towards a country that was historically known as the Little Satan. Since Nazanin's arrest, the Foreign Office has changed its travel advice for Iran, warning that British citizens and dual nationals are more at risk than citizens of other countries, and that because Iran doesn't recognise dual nationality, they won't be guaranteed consular access in detention.
Richard hopes Nazanin will be on a flight home soon, but he urges caution to the would-be traveller.
People need to be very aware of just the risks that there are in Iran at the moment. There's a big and dangerous internal fight happening, and I mean, someone has been taken every month with a foreign passport, and that's principally British, American, Canadian. So it could be your family as well.
Kamal and Nazanin's families insist they're innocent, but in the broader machinations of Iranian politics, that may not make much difference.
After the break, trying to tackle social inequality brick by brick. Theresa May is the latest Prime Minister who's promised to solve the housing crisis. But is it a problem any politician can solve?
Welcome back. Now, inequality is the buzzword. Social reform, top of the agenda. That's Theresa May's pledge. But one of the main problems she'll have to tackle first is the housing crisis. It was a key issue at today's cabinet meeting. But is it simply too huge a challenge for any politician to tackle? Our business correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, has been to find out.
Breaking ground on a new home. If only there was more of this going on.
Housing is so elemental to everything. Your chances in school, your ability to be able to hold down a job, its impact on your both physical and mental health. Poor housing gives people a really poor quality of life.
If you went back to 1997, you'd find that Tony Blair said he'd fix the housing problem. So did Brown, so did Cameron. Today, Theresa May became the latest Prime Minister to promise her government would finally do something. But Britain's spiralling housing crisis seems to be an endless puzzle no politician is able to solve. And here's Mrs May's Fellowship of the Ring, 9 ministers heading up a social reform committee, tasked with creating policy that reflects the rhetoric of her one nation conservatism. But the truth is that home ownership is at its lowest level in 30 years, as house prices have soared while average wages have stagnated. The biggest problem is a lack of supply. Homes are no longer being built in Britain at the pace that's needed. In 1969, local councils built over 175,000 houses. But this year, it was just under 1,500. The government says it wants to build 200,000 new homes a year, but in the past decade it has hit this target just once. And in the last year, the number fell woefully short again, with just 155,000 new units being constructed. This Nobel Prize-winning economist believes the stranglehold of supply on new homes is having a deeper impact on the wider economy and on inequality.
I think there's something wrong with the housing market. If the poor can't get access to housing that's of the kind they need, they can't get access to jobs. And of course, that's a vicious circle.
Theresa May's new government seems to have put inequality really at the heart of the rhetoric that we're hearing. Is this just lip service?
Well, it's beautiful rhetoric. And if it actually implemented, it'll be a major step forward.
Do you think they understand the scale of the problem when it comes to inequality?
No, I don't think they understand the scale, that this is not a wrinkle. This is not something that is just a tweak in the policy, and now we say we keep the basic framework and we tweak it a little bit, and all of a sudden everybody is going to benefit.
This is one of the bedrooms, and that's a brand new bathroom.
In the last 16 years, average house prices have ballooned 60%. While the budget for house building has been transferred to local authorities, central government has placed a limit on the amount local councils can borrow in order to build, something Sarah Hayward, leader of Camden Council, says has been hugely destructive.
There is not enough housing in the areas of the country where people want to live. We are doing our bit by building housing here, but we are at the limits of the borrowing cap, which is an artificial cap set by central government. One thing that Theresa May could do like that is lift the borrowing cap so councils like Camden can build much more housing.
The inability of successive governments to deliver enough homes has been a colossal failure, one Theresa May knows Britain can no longer afford.
That's it for Channel 4 News tonight.
Until tomorrow at 7, that's Channel 4 News from all of us here. Have a very good evening.
Good evening.